Hello, class. This is Faisal coming at you here on May 26th for English Grade 12 College. So we are back. I was not posting anything yesterday because it was Eid al-Fitr. Technically, it's still Eid al-Fitr because it's a 3-day thing, but we're getting back to class now and we're moving ahead. So, first of all, this Friday is midterms, right? So I'll be emailing your grades to you along with your oral communication mark in the evening, right? So don't expect it first thing in the morning. I'm gonna be handling it in the afternoon. I have to submit it to the principal and vice principal first and sort out that paperwork. If there's a delay, I'll let you know. But that's my plan. Is I'm gonna email you your midterms in the evening along with your oral communication grade, right? The one you've been getting for participating in the talks. Just so you know, that grade, it's going to be a situation where it's not going to be held against you. You will not see your mark go down because of that grade. You will only see it go up, right, by participating in my talks there. So, the last day to hand in any stray paragraphs or short answers is going to be Thursday at noon, right? Anything you hand in after that will be assigned a 0 for the purposes of midterms, right? Most of you have been pretty good in handing things on time, which is excellent, right? But if you haven't handed anything in, including the question I'm going to give you today, then it has to be there by Thursday at noon, right? So today's Tuesday, so you've got 2 days to wrap up my little questions and my paragraphs and whatever else you need. If there's a problem doing this, you should let me know, right? Don't just not say anything, right? Give me the stuff, and we will sort that out. Now, one other announcement. Our next online meeting is going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, the 27th, at 2 p.m., right? We'll be talking about Sherlock Holmes and how he works, and we'll also be talking a little bit about essays, which we will be doing this week and next week, right? I should really say this week and next week. All right, so that's the plan for now. So, what I want to talk about now is our next short story, The Adventure of the Six Napoleons, another Sherlock Holmes story that I have assigned to the class, right? If you didn't see it yesterday, then it's right there on the course website, right? You just click Six Napoleons PDF and there you go, right? So that's already posted on the website. And this is another Sherlock Holmes story, right? And the advantage of doing the Sherlock Holmes stuff is as you read more of his stories, right, you're going to find that you are used to him, right, and you know what this guy is like, and you know what Dr. Watson is like, and everything like that. So it's going to get easier to understand Sherlock Holmes as we continue to go through his material, right? So that's one of the advantages that you're going to find you get as you continue to go through this. This is the last short story we're going to do, by the way. Then we're going to do an essay, and then we're going to go on to our novel. But the novel also is Sherlock Holmes, right? So I hope you guys are liking him, because I've got a lot of Sherlock Holmes in the pipe for you guys, right? To the Hound of the Baskervilles being the next thing. Nevertheless, I picked this one, number one, because it's a good mystery. I really like this one. And also because it introduces some of the other elements of Sherlock Holmes that might not have been as apparent in the Adventure of the Three Students, right? So let's take a look at the beginning here together, and just at the beginning here, right at the first paragraph, we get introduced to a new character. So it says here, it was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready with attention to the details of any case which the detective was engaged, and was able occasionally, without any active interference, to give some hint or suggestion drawn from his own vast knowledge and experience. on this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather and the newspapers. Then he had fallen silent, puffing thoughtfully on his cigar. Holmes looked keenly at him. So, this guy, Detective Lestrade, is a real, or Inspector Lestrade, I should say. He's not a detective, he's an inspector. He is a local policeman with Scotland Yard, I should add that, who appears in many, many of these Sherlock Holmes stories. He's going to appear in the novel as well. That term, Scotland Yard, is to this day the name of the London Police Department, right? So in Toronto, of course, we're the Toronto Police Department and everything like that. But over in London, right, their London Police Department is called Scotland Yard, right? So they're not in Scotland when they talk about this guy coming from Scotland Yard. He's not even Scottish himself, right? Scotland Yard is the name of their police department. But Lestrade is a sort of important character because his basic role is that when he has an interesting case that he can't figure out himself, he brings it to Sherlock Holmes to ask about. Now, this guy Lestrade is himself not very smart, right? You know, I'll even put it right here. Lestrade is himself an idiot, right? In fact, it's sort of one of those things in Sherlock Holmes where if Lestrade or even Watson says, well, maybe it happened this way, you probably can automatically say, no, it's wrong, right? Not because you know better, but because Lestrade is saying it, or Watson even is saying it, right? So Lestrade is sort of the counterpoint to Sherlock Holmes. He's there to make Sherlock Holmes look even smarter, right? Because he's this actual policeman, right? And he's like saying, maybe it happened this way. And then, well, it always works out that Lestrade is wrong, right? I can't think of a single case, and I've read them all like twice or three times. I can't think of a single case where Lestrade was right? So that's sort of one thing to know as you read these stories is that Lestrade is wrong, right? That's just by default. He is never going to say anything right. The other thing that gets sort of identified in this opening passage is another thing about Sherlock Holmes himself, right? And you might have picked up on this during the first mystery, right? The three students, but it's really apparent here, right? Which is the way he looks at things, right? So he's looking. Lestrade's come for dinner, and Sherlock Holmes says, "Anything remarkable on hand?" He asked. "Oh no, Mr. Holmes, nothing very particular." "Then tell me about it." Lestrade laughed. "Well, Mr. Holmes, there is no use denying that there is something on my mind, and yet it is such an absurd business that I hesitated to bother you about it. On the other hand, although it is trivial, it is undoubtedly queer, and I know that you have a taste for all that is out of the common. But in my opinion, it comes more in Dr. Watson's line than ours." "Disease?" said I. "Madness, anyhow, and a queer madness, too. You would think there was anyone living at this time of day who had such a hatred of Napoleon I that he would break any image of him that he could see." Holmes sank back in his chair. "That's no business of mine," said he. So, if something is not related to mysteries or to solving a puzzle or anything like that, right? If there's no mystery to it, Sherlock Holmes instantly not interested, right? When he hears about this guy, oh, the crazy man is breaking statues of Napoleon, then Sherlock Holmes is like, not interested. But when he hears about this, exactly, that's what I said. But then, when the man commits burglary in order to break images which are not his own, that brings it away from the doctor and on to the policeman. Holmes sat up again. "Burglary! This is most interesting. Let me hear the details." So, that's where Holmes gets hooked in, right? So, if something is unrelated to solving a case, right, he is disinterested, right? It's nothing really to do with him as far as he's concerned, right? But as soon as you bring in something like burglary or murder or something like that, then he's interested, right? That's sort of how Sherlock Holmes operates, right? And it is a key part of his character. Now, we have a case here about someone who is going around breaking into people's houses and breaking these little busts of Napoleon. So first of all, a bust is essentially a statue of someone's head, right? It's a little statue, usually about this big, right, of a person's head, normally a famous person's head. In fact, I don't know why you would have one if it wasn't a famous person, but it's just like a little statue of someone's head. Now, these busts are of Napoleon, right? Now, you might be thinking, who's Napoleon, right? Some of you might know already, though, but just in case you don't, Napoleon is this man here. He was the French emperor for a little while, right? He waged a lot of wars in France and conquered a lot of territory in Europe before being defeated, right, by the rest of Europe, including Britain, right? So Napoleon was the famous general and emperor of France, right? But all of that happened about 80 years before the story was written, right? And it's been a long time since then, right? Even when the story was written, right? This would have been written around 1895. Napoleon was about 1814, right? So that's when he was defeated, at least. So you're looking at someone 80 years later. He's taking statues of Napoleon, right, and smashing them, right? It would sort of be like someone today, smashing statues of, Kaiser Wilhelm II, right, because of World War II, right? It wouldn't be like Hitler because Hitler's different, right? But Napoleon at the time, he's sort of old news, so it's weird to have someone walking around smashing statues of him, right? So Lestrade even points that out, right? Even in the line I just read, right? Where he says, you wouldn't think there was anyone living at this time of day who had such a hatred of Napoleon the First that he would break any image of him that he could see, right? So Lestrade is thinking it's kind of weird that someone would go and want to destroy these images of Napoleon. That he could be so angry about what happened with Napoleon that he would go around smashing statues, right? Because why would you be angry at Napoleon, almost 100 years later? So that is the first unusual thing about the case. Now, Watson on the second page talks about how this is probably the work of a maniac or lunatic or something like that, and someone who has an idée fixe. Let's see. This is the second page. There are no limits to the possibilities of monomania, I answered. There is the condition which the modern French psychologists have called the idée fixe, which may be trifling in character and accompanied by complete sanity in every other way. A man who had read deeply about Napoleon, or had possibly received some hereditary family injury through the Great War, might conceivably form such an idée fixe, and under its influence be capable of any fantastic outrage, right? So this is the mental illness theory, that this guy, some reason, maybe his grandfather was killed in the Napoleonic Wars or something, for some reason, he's just so angry at Napoleon that he's going to go around smashing these statues. Now, word to the wise for you budding detectives out there, right? Whenever you've got Watson saying anything, right? Just like I was saying, or Lestrade, as I was saying earlier, when they present an idea, right, like this, saying, well, maybe it's because of this, you should always be thinking, no, 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 right? Not because the idea should be dismissed out of hand or anything like that, but because of who they are, right? The guy who has the right answer is Sherlock Holmes, right? Watson and Lestrade are usually only going to give you wrong answers, right? So even before we read on, we should know it's probably not right, because Watson is never right. Neither is Lestrade for that reason. And in fact, Holmes says right away, that won't do, my dear Watson, said Holmes, shaking his head, for no amount of idée fixe would enable your interesting monomaniac to find out where these busts were situated. So this gets back to what Holmes was saying, right? Which is that the criminal, whoever this guy smashing the statues is only going for one type of statue, right? So they aren't walking around smashing every single kind of Napoleon statue, but rather are looking for a specific type. Let me try to explain that. It's like if someone had an obsession with ripping up these cat dolls, right? Ripping them up, right? But they only go for this particular type, right? They don't go for any other color, any other shape, right? It's just that particular type, right? So what that tells us and what that tells Mr. Holmes is that this guy is not just after the Napoleon thing, right? It's not that he hates Napoleon, right? It's that he's going for this one type of statue. So, the story goes on, and I just want to illustrate some key points before giving you your question of the day. First of all, it's revealed that burglary, well, it soon turns into murder, right? When Holmes and Watson go into this murder scene and find this man who's been killed right next to one of these little statues again, right? So that's statue number 3 that's been smashed here, along with now a dead man, right? So now this has escalated quite a bit, right? And it's in this story where you're going to start to see some of the sort of diverse characters that are part of Sherlock Holmes, right? And which sort of makes these stories sort of timeless, right? So, first of all, you've got this journalist guy who is to be found on page 3. And, he's saying, oh, well, let me just read it. Where is he? There he is. I must try to make something of it, said he, though I have no doubt that the first editions of the evening papers are out already with full details. It's like my luck. You remember when the Stand fell at Doncaster? Well, I was the only journalist in the Stand, and my journal the only one that had no account of it, for I was too shaken to write it. And now I'll be too late with the murder done on my doorstep. So, Sherlock Holmes's times, right, the Victorian era, is when we start to see the beginning of the media as we might sort of know it today, with a lot of different newspapers, physical newspapers, of course, and journals that spread the news, right? So that's part of what makes these stories sort of last through time, right? Is that, yeah, it's set in a time when there are horse-drawn carriages and everything, but the world here isn't very different, right? Especially when it comes to things like the media. And in fact, Holmes uses the media on page 5 at the bottom, right there, right over here, you'll see that Holmes puts out an article, right, where he says, it is satisfactory to know that there can be no difference of opinion upon this case, since Mr. Lestrade, one of the most experienced members of the official force, and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known consulting expert, have each come to the conclusion that the grotesque series of incidents which have ended in so tragic a fashion arise from lunacy rather than deliberate crime. No explanation save mental aberration can cover the facts. So that's not what Holmes actually thinks, right? Holmes thinks that there's something else going on here, right? But he puts this story into the media as a sort of false story so that the actual person, right, the person behind these crimes would, sort of lower their guard and say, all right, the detectives don't know what I'm doing, and I can keep looking in the statues, right? Not to give away what's happening here. So that's part of what Holmes is up to here. The other thing I want to just point out before we get to the questions here is this guy and the way he talks. When I say this guy, I mean the seller of the statues that they go to interrogate on page 4 at the beginning of page 5, right? When you saw him talk, you might notice that he's sort of weird, Let me see here, just at the end of page 4. Yes, sir, on the very counter, sir, said he. What we pay taxes and rates for, I don't know, when any ruffian can come in and break one's goods. Yes, sir, it was I who sold Dr. Barnicot his 2 statues. Disgraceful, sir. A nihilist plot, that's what I make of it. No one but an anarchist would go about breaking statues. Red Republicans, that's what I call them. Who did I get the statues from? I don't see what that has to do with it. Well, if you really want to know, I got them from Gelder & Co. in Church Street, Stepney. They are a well-known house in the trade and have been this 20 years. How many had I? 3, 2, and 1 are 3. 2 of Dr. Barnicot's and 1 smashed in broad daylight on my own counter. Do I know that photograph? No, I don't. Yes, I do, though. Why, it's Beppo. He's a kind of Italian piecework man who made himself useful in the shop. He could carve a bit and gild and frame and do odd jobs. The fellow left me last week, and I've heard nothing of him since. No, I don't know where he came from, nor where he went to. I have nothing against him while he was here. He was gone 2 days before the bus was smashed. So, you'll notice this guy doesn't talk in a straightforward way, right? First he says, no, I don't, and then he says, yes, I do. Right, and that's just Sir Arthur Conan Doyle trying to be realistic in his dialogue, and that's sort of one of the interesting things about these stories as well, is that his characters really do, even in a short paragraph like this one, come to life, right? And they sort of do give you a specific voice, right? So if you were a little confused by this particular paragraph, then you should know that. He's just supposed to be a guy in a shop who's answering questions and, not really thinking about what he's saying. That's what he's going for there. You might wonder about the Red Republican line. And if you guessed it, yes, that is a reference to communists, right? Back in 1895, communists didn't have any real power anywhere, right? There was no Soviet Union or anything yet, but they were around, and people like this would not like them, right? So that's what he was talking about with the Red Republicans. Anyhow, so at this point, I invite you guys to just finish the story. We will talk about the ending both tomorrow during uh, our Google Meetup, and I'll also touch on it in Thursday's video, right? So finish the story if you haven't already. You know me, I don't like talking about endings before you have a chance to read them, especially for Sherlock Holmes. But we will get to our question of the day, which is meant to be another of my big questions, right? And this, by the way, is the final of the 4, right? So you've had 3 so far, this is the 4th, and they all add up to basically be a test. So the question is, considering both the Sherlock Holmes stories we have read now, this one and the 3 students, do you think that this character is a realistic depiction of a human being, or is he just a fantasy? So, what's at the heart of this question is some of the historical things about Sherlock Holmes that that I mentioned in the first video, right? Which is that for a lot of people, when these things were being written, a lot of people thought this was a real guy, right? And his address at 222 Baker Street, right, actually would get letters, right, from people that had cases, right, that they needed solved, right. They would try to get in touch with Sherlock Holmes, right, and try to find him, right, because they thought he was a real person, right. And it's sort of a common reaction. Maybe even when you guys read the story, you guys thought, wait, is this a real story or not, right? It's sort of something that is a very common Sherlock Holmes response. So the question is, you guys know him pretty well now. You've read 2 stories by him, and you're going to get to know him even better. Do you guys find him to be particularly realistic, right? You see the sort of magnificent way that he solves this case, right? You should go read it. And he sort of puts everything together, and in the end, he just sort of figures out exactly what the statue thing was about and finds this amazing thing at the same time, right? I'll talk more about that tomorrow when I'm sure you all have read it. But it's sort of awesome, right? What he is able to do. And is that, in your opinion, realistic, or is it just a fantasy? Right? Is it just like someone who's totally unrealistic and just something that only can exist in human imagination? Can a human being be like Sherlock Holmes, or is that not actually possible? So that's my question of the day, and I want you guys to answer it in the ways that you have been answering my questions already. And we will talk about this more during our Google meeting tomorrow. Now, looking ahead again, after midterms, after we're finished with the Sherlock Holmes business, we will be moving towards essays, right? So originally, I was going to have you guys watch a documentary, and then do an essay about that. But we're sort of running out of time. We're almost to June already. So instead, we're just going to have it so that you guys write an essay about these short stories. So that's coming soon. For now, though, answer my question, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. So have a good day.